Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Personalization Outbreak Podcast, your go-to podcast for meaningful conversations with influential leaders from different sectors every week. This week, our guest is John Quelch. Now, John is the Dean of the University of Miami, Patti and Allan Herbert Business School. Now, John has a wealth of senior leadership experience, having previously served at internationally recognized business schools such as China Europe International, Harvard Business School, and London Business School. Now, together, we'll talk about the evolution of branding and how traditional consumer goods marketing has been routinized. We'll also discuss the changing mindset of different student generations and how the spirit of self-determination, sustainability, and collectivism is more prevalent today than ever. Now, finally, we'll review the transformation that's happening in higher education and how traditional higher ed stands in the way of tech-oriented newcomers. See, all episodes are available at ageofpersonalization.com, where you will find content about leadership, strategy, and innovation. So if you relate to our content, please join the movement and help us spread the word. Now, before we get started, please hit the like button below, share it with your colleagues, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and social media at Glen so you can be in touch with our most recent content about leadership in the age of personalization. Let's get started. You are listening to Personalization Outbreak, a podcast about the collapse of traditional corporate standards in today's more personalized world. I'm Glen Yopes. I'm a leadership strategist, author, contributor to Forbes, and founder of the Leadership in the Age of Personalization movement. On this show, I'm interviewing executives across multiple sectors to find out how the balance between standardization and personalization can exist. John, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Glenn. Delighted to be here.
So, John, I've got to get to the real question. Why do you find your most authentic self on the tennis court?
First of all, I began playing tennis on public courts when I was around about 10 years old in England, and I've been playing as a pretty ineffective, slow learner for the last 50 or 60 years. I think probably the number one point I would say is I find it very difficult to exercise unless I'm competing with someone. So I'm a pretty competitive person, and I like to have a challenge, in this case, on the other side of the net. And one advantage of tennis over let's say football or rugby, as it would have been described in England, is that you don't get caked in mud getting a good workout. You can wear, very nice clothing. And my mother was a nurse. She didn't want to see me come home from school completely caked in mud. And accordingly, tennis from her point of view was also a very civilized activity. So exercise, a competitor on the other side of the net. I like doubles as well. So, teamwork vis-a-vis a team on the other side of the net's also cool. And, no big laundry bill at the end of it.
So a few quick follow-up questions. Clay, grass, hard court.
Okay, so in the UK, when I was growing up, on the public courts were pretty uneven. So you got to be pretty agile on your feet to be able to deal with the unexpected bounce off the court. But of course, grass was and still is the surface of choice in the UK. Wimbledon being the principal grass court championship in the world. And so you learn to play on grass, you learn to play on clay. When I was growing up, hard courts were not quite so in fashion, and certainly not of the caliber and quality that the hard courts are today. Yes. My particular game is really a relatively slow strategy game, and that is much more easy to win on a clay court than it is on a hard court. So clay would be my preferred surface.
Love a day playing in clay. I love it. I love sliding across the court. Now, speaking of strategy, John, let's jump right into it. Now, whether it's higher ed or healthcare or corporate, we're all feeling the tensions between what we refer to as the age of standardization, where the organization defines the individual, and this age of personalization, where the individual is now defining the ways they'd like to see organizations learn, work, lead, and conduct business. We need to come to the reality now that these two forces need each other, yet they're now operating at the extremes. John, why do you think we reached this point of extreme? How can we have avoided it? And what must organizations do to find the right balance? Because right now, I don't see that they understand the value of both.
So I'm not sure that I would entirely agree with you, Glenn. I mean, certainly, if you're someone who wants to be totally in control of your own destiny, you can either become a monk or you can become an entrepreneur. Even if you're a monk or you're an entrepreneur, you're still having to listen to a few rules laid down by the abbot or a few rules laid down by the venture capitalists. But entrepreneurship, as a result of the availability of venture capital, is an opportunity for people to express their personal passions at a level of frequency that we have not previously seen in human history. So the availability of capital as a liberating force is extremely important. Yes, there are a certain number of people from a personality point of view who still want to work for very large, major companies, multinational organizations, whether they be in the NGO sector or in the for-profit sector. And, that requires a set of skills and relationship management skills, in particular internally, that some people don't have the patience to be able to develop or wish to pursue as part of their daily work. I myself, I'm in academia. I'm a lifelong academic, and academia is kind of a halfway house in this regard because obviously there are significant university structures and organizational processes that you have to contend with. But if you want a career as an individualist, with the benefit of academic freedom, there's a tremendous amount of latitude as long as you're a good teacher and a good researcher to basically chart your own course. So it's in academia a little bit of a mixed bag. It's a halfway house between the two extremes that you're referring to. Certainly, there are extremes in our society, polarization in our society. That's, I guess, partly because polar positions are more attention-getting and more entertaining and more newsworthy on social media and as part of the 24-hour news cycle.
It's a very interesting point. I agree that it seems like these forms of extremism have become clickbait, or a form of getting people's attention, almost trying to manipulate people's thinking, when what we're really, I think, striving for is a sense of more unification. And in the process, we're finding more division in society. So on that note, let's go back to your role as a brand strategist. I know that this is a deep passion of yours. And, in the past, an employee took great pride in associating themselves with the corporate brand identity. And in today, it doesn't feel like that's a big sales point for an employee that wants to work for a corporation. In fact, you can say the same things about consumers. They don't seem to want the brand to define them anymore. The consumers want to define the brand. What's changed in your opinion?
So, in every era, every decade, there are hot companies. There are hot companies. There are hot industries. Remember, plastics was advocated strongly in the Graduate, the movie.
Yeah.
I remember when I was coming out of Harvard Business School that Tupperware was the big. This really dates me, right? The Tupperware was the big employer of choice that year. And today there are other hot companies. When I was teaching at Harvard, let's say around about 1985 or thereabouts, I used to teach the consumer marketing elective course in the MBA program. We'd have about 100 people a year taking that course. Maybe 8 of them would go to Procter and Gamble. And Procter and Gamble was obviously #1 marketing company and would take the pick of the litter as far as those folks were concerned. Nowadays, traditional consumer packaged goods marketing has to some extent been routinized, and the growth rate in that industry is not nearly as substantial as it is in many other industries. And MBA students tend to be drawn to those industries where they see the quickest pathway to promotion and executive leadership positions. And of course, those are the industries that have the highest growth rates at a particular time. So the situation is always cyclical. I think branding is no less important today than it was then, 20, 30, 40 years ago. But the companies and the brands that are commanding the attention of consumers are obviously different today. And brands that might have appeared on the Interbrand most valuable list 25 years ago are no longer even in the top 50.
So how is this impacting the MBA student today? I mean, what are you seeing from your students at the University of Miami Business School? Because their mindsets are changing, and they seem to be looking for a path to get what they want faster than what the traditional path has historically called for. Any thoughts?
I don't think so. I think that the first group of MBA students I taught in 1977 were as I was going to say arrogant, but that's not a good word to use, were as optimistic about their future prospects in the short term as any MBA student today is. And I think that's terrific for the economy. We want to be producing people who believe that they can do more than they're capable of, who we can imagine in the end will exceed what they define as their own potential and do for the economy great things that will help all of us as we grow older and get into retirement. I mean, we need wealth creation by young people to make sure that those of us who are retired can be properly supported and looked after, right?
Yeah.
So I don't see that human nature has really changed that much. I think perhaps the percentage of students who today believe that within 5 years of graduating with an MBA, they will be running their own business and should be running their own business. That spirit of self-determination is more prevalent than it was when I first started teaching MBAs. And that goes back to our point about the burgeoning interest in entrepreneurship. Of course, role models such as Gates and Steve Jobs and more recent role models are very important in motivating young people to think that they can achieve great things. So I remain extremely optimistic, but I don't see the pattern being as different today as I saw it when I first started in this game.
What is the mix between graduates from the program going to a corporation versus becoming an entrepreneur?
Right. So again, you have to think in terms of immediately upon graduation, but then look at it 3 years out, 5 years out, because a lot of folks, might go to a consulting firm for a few years and then set up their own business, get tired of the long hours and the heavy travel, whether or not that comes back. And people do want to learn from, and you can learn an awful lot by going to Coca-Cola or going to Procter & Gamble or IBM or a traditional company like that. You can still learn a heck of a lot that, at the same time as it probably ends up boring you to death and you feel like you're being locked in and not able to realize your full potential. At the same time, you value all of what you've learned and you take that with you when you set up your own company or collaborate with a couple of former MBA students, classmates to set up something.
You know what, John, you just reminded me of a story I didn't plan to share, but so I've lived that. I mean, was at Sunkist, got my classical training at Gallo Wine Company, and then I decided to go work for an artichokes organization, if you can believe this. And there was a call that, the president said, "Hey, Glenn, can you get on the call with this gentleman? He speaks Spanish. I don't understand him." And 8 months later, I started my first venture with a grower in central Mexico. Not only did we take the company's market share, but we also changed the industry. So this is a very common thing, especially for those that aren't so fixated or are not big believers in standards and they want to create their own. So I can see this play out quite nicely. And it's interesting as I continue to work with, emerging leaders from large corporations, we're seeing the same trend. I mean, you mentioned NGOs. These generations are looking to make an impact and to make a difference. And so they come to the world of business and work with a very different mindset than certainly I did.
Let me tell you one thing that we've done down here that's been highly effective. So, as you know, Miami is probably ground zero for ocean rise in the United States. So we have a lot of people who are very interested in and concerned about climate change and the impact on the South Florida economy and on real estate prices and so forth. So what we decided to do, given the Generation Z interest in sustainability, was we put together a couple of years ago a new degree program, which is an MS, a one-year MS in sustainable business. And one of the reasons why we did that, in addition to what I've just said, is that we happen to have a School of Marine and Atmospheric Science within the University of Miami, which is a very well-esteemed school. And we're able to offer a degree program, therefore, in sustainable business that combines the science with the business. And this is actually the only STEM certified MS in sustainable business in the United States. Now, why is that important? It's not that this is going to be the biggest degree program that the Miami Herbert Business School offers. But what we're finding is that a lot of people who want to do an MBA or want to do an MS in finance or an MS in business analytics, they want to do it at a school that values sustainability. And so what's more tangible evidence of walking the talk than to have a program, a degree program in that topic? And the courses that we put together and designed for this degree program are open and available as electives to all of our MBA students and our other master's degree students. In addition to which we secured LEED Gold certification for operations and maintenance of our buildings. Our buildings are, in most cases, 20 years old plus, but LEED has a certification that is not for new buildings, but for existing buildings in terms of operations and maintenance. So again, to walk the talk, we were able to get that LEED certification. We're actually up for renewal this year and shooting for platinum, as well as we hope to get our the other certification is the WELL well certification for our building operations as well this year.
Yeah, this is what we're learning in higher ed, is that it's so important to get out in front of what the individual is looking for. And this issue of sustainability is a huge one. So thanks for sharing that with us, John. Now, Scott, I'm about ready to shift gears here. What are you picking up?
Maybe just a short comment about maybe just tying together the comment about the individual, and maybe something earlier to what John said about essentially this, we've got, right, what was it, the monk and the entrepreneur, right? And one of the things that you're working towards, right, is to try to help inspire people to take more of that entrepreneurial spirit in light of, this is individual agency, right, as opposed to sort of that collective agency where we're all a team and we get together. And so I wanted to sort of check back on one point that you raised, and then we can maybe move on, Glenn, to continue. But you had mentioned that when you're thinking about sort of the time frame of how things have changed in terms of the individual human nature, you mentioned, I'm specifically talking at the individual level, and this proclivity towards joining the collective. I'm going to join the corporation, or I'm going to go and I'm going to be a CEO within, well, hopefully less than 5 years. Could you redress that? Because I thought I heard that you said that you really haven't seen such a major shift in the amount of people that are moving towards the entrepreneurial sort of spirit, or is it that you're just saying they're moving there faster? Could you check it a little bit? Because I think there is something really big going on amongst human nature in terms of the way that we balance the individual and our relation to society, whether that's a corporation or something bigger. And I just would really love some more insight from you.
No, I think you're right that a higher percentage of people are now wishing to express their individuality earlier, and that feeds on itself. I see my friend next door doing it. I want to do it. So there's a steamroller effect, and the confidence that I have that I'm able to do it is going to be magnified if I see people I know who've already done it. But one thing I would point out, and that is that, being an entrepreneur does not mean that you can be ignorant of the collective and the frameworks that determine team success, because no entrepreneur that I know of has been super successful as a result of just being an individual. In order to scale a business, you have to be able to select good people. You have to be able to organize. You have to be able to delegate. There's a famous question that is often asked of entrepreneurs: do you want to be king or do you want to be rich? And if you want to be rich, you can't be the king. You have to be the first among equals and assemble a team. So understanding the collective is as important to being a super successful entrepreneur as it is to being, embedded as an executive in a established corporation.
That is super helpful. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the idea that we're not saying there's a massive shift. It does appear that with seeing more of the entrepreneurial spirit and individuality rising up, that in fact the collectivity is still first and foremost, and to be the individual, to be that monk, you still need, right? You still need your boss, you still need your lane, and I appreciate you helping me to understand that. Yeah, so much has changed, but maybe that's more surface than I thought. I'll come back to exponential technology and communications growth, but we'll finish that at the end.
So John, let's go back to the Herbert Business School. What transformations do you anticipate as your biggest opportunities?
So certainly the COVID situation has, as we all know, accelerated the application of online learning. We did have prior to COVID online degree programs that mirrored our MBA, our MS in finance, and MS in accounting, as a matter of fact. Those were the three that we already had. So we had a number of faculty members who were already experienced in online delivery, and that was very helpful in terms of getting us through the crisis of the last year and a quarter. I would say, with respect to graduate level education in particular, that you're going to see more blended programs. By blended, I mean a portion that's face-to-face, a portion that's online, and fewer 100% residential programs. At the undergraduate level, we believe at the University of Miami, and anyone who's visited our campus knows this, that we have a phenomenally beautiful campus that is a destination campus.
Sure.
And we believe that there is long-term a sustained demand for a 4-year residential undergraduate experience. Now, if you're in the middle of nowhere, if you're running a university in the middle of nowhere, as opposed to adjacent, as Coral Gables is adjacent to Miami, one of the fastest growing and most exciting global cities, you're not going to have the ability to be a magnet for a residential degree program in the same way as we are. And you're going to therefore need to go further into online earlier at the undergraduate level than we will have to do.
So what are the transformations you fear the most for their potential to disrupt, John?
Certainly, if you take, let's just take a couple of names, okay? Say Google or Amazon, started a global university and basically put together a global undergraduate business program or a global MBA program. The question would be whether or not, well, there are two things that you would need. One would be you need brilliant instructional design and engaging course content and course presentation and course delivery. On top of that, though, you need outstanding academics, because a lot of the draw of particular academic brands is the individual faculty brands that underpin what's being delivered, and really actually in many ways differentiate what's delivered at one place versus another. So the interesting question would be, could Google and Amazon hire people away from Harvard Business School or from Stanford? Would they be able to put out a value proposition that would get those top academics to move to those new brands? The two things that hold that back from happening are, number one, for most academics, being a part of a group of colleagues off of which they can feed intellectually is very important. So, Google might hire me, let's say, to become, one of its lead professors. But would I have, 10 or 15 other people at Google in the same subject area or adjacent subject areas that I could feed off for intellectual purposes? And would I be able to have the same level of freedom that I have at my university? Would I have the time to research and publish articles as I do now? So, it's not so easy for Google or Amazon to perhaps do this as it may seem at first blush. It's not just a matter of money. If it was just a matter of money, half the people in academia wouldn't be in academia. They would be on Wall Street or they would be somewhere else.
So it's evident, John, that you're aware of the infrastructure that both of those companies are trying to build around education.
Sure.
What are your views on Google's certification programs? I heard they're pretty good.
Yeah, I think they're designing and delivering quality product. But there's one other thing that higher education has that sort of stands in the way of these newcomers. It's a barrier to the newcomers. And that is the network effect associated with the alumni base that you become a member of if you happen to be at a particular university.
Absolutely.
So University of Miami is not a large university. It's a relatively smallish private university, but we have, I think, something like 180,000 alumni. And probably around about half of them are within 100 or 150 miles of Miami itself, living. And accordingly, people who want to live in Miami, if you're living in Columbus or Cleveland or Chicago and you're sick of the weather, you want to live in Miami longer term, you'd come to Miami and the University of Miami to get access to the 180,000 alumni, half of whom are within 150 miles of this campus. And that is a huge benefit. And that is something that if you start from scratch as, Amazon University, it's not easy to replicate that. You could set up an alumni club of people who are Amazon Prime subscribers, but, I don't think that quite has the same level of exclusivity as the University of Miami alumni base.
Sure.
So that's a challenge as well for them.
Yeah, so I'm going to shift gears here as we get closer to wrapping things up, John. Now, in 2018, you co-authored the book, Building a Culture of Health. And, this topic, as I'm sure you know, is quite timely as workplaces are becoming more chaotic and hybrid. Large employers must, place the whole person experience at the center of their workforce transformation efforts. So what are your views now that large organizations, especially given the effects of the pandemic, what would you advise them as they're starting to think of putting together these more comprehensive health and well-being programs?
So when we're talking about the book in question, the basic premise of the book was that every company and every organization is in the healthcare business.
Exactly.
In other words, if you're making widgets or if you're making pots, you are a healthcare company. And let me tell you the 4 reasons why you're a healthcare company. First of all, the widgets and the pots that you make, how safe, how healthful, how nutritious are those products that you're actually making? Are they safe? Are they sustainable? Are they healthy? So point number 2 is, what's the employee health looking like? What are your working conditions looking like? What are your employee benefits looking like? Do you have those well-being programs that you're alluding to? Then thirdly, you have the environmental health issue. When you're making the pots or widgets, are you water neutral? Are you emitting excess carbon, etc.? And then finally, there's the issue which I think most companies have the most difficulty embracing, and that's the issue of community health. Community health is the 4th pillar of these 4 elements to building a culture of health. And most CEOs would take the position pre-COVID that, hey, community health, that's something that I pay taxes for and the government delivers. That's not my responsibility. I'll look after my own employees to an extent, but I'm not going to be bothered about community health. That's beyond the scope of my shareholders' interests. But what we've been able to say to these chief executives is 2 things. First of all, the employees that you employ spend 2/3 of their time in the communities where they go home to sleep at night and drive in from the following day. And if those communities are not healthy, the employees that you hire are not going to be healthy. Or if they're healthy, they're going to have distractions at home because they're going to have relatives or loved ones or friends who are not healthy that have to be taken care of. And then the second thing that we emphasize is that if you have a healthy community, you have an economically healthy community. Right. And if you have an economically healthy community and you're, let's say, a supermarket, you're going to sell more product out of your supermarket. If you're a retail bank in a community, you're going to get more deposits in your bank if your community is healthy economically. And to be healthy economically, you have to be healthy physically and mentally. So when we make these points to corporations, CEOs get it. And so aided by COVID, we've seen actually an elevation in the amount of commitment on the part of major corporations to assisting and funding, supporting community health initiatives.
So first of all, I agree with everything that you've said, but how prepared do you think that corporations are recognizing that the employee priorities have totally changed? I mean, and to drive business recovery, if we're not creating a culture of health in companies, there will be no recovery.
I think the major companies that I deal with are very astute and understand this. As is often the case, it's the largest, most significant Fortune 500 companies that have a brand strength that enables them to command profit margins, which give them a certain amount of discretionary money to invest in these areas. Those are the ones that are in the driver's seat. The challenge is among small and medium-sized businesses, and especially if they've been gutted by the virus and the effects of the virus, for them to be distracted in their mind by community health issues, diverting some of their profit margin, if there is any, towards funding local initiatives. That's a very difficult thing to ask a lot of businesses that have been financially challenged on Main Street by the virus to actually do. And one of the biggest challenges in this community health space is the reality that a large portion of the workforce every day, a larger portion of it, is migrating to companies which operate virtually and which actually aren't anchored physically in a main street or a town. They are operating out of the valley with workforces that are distributed all over the world, and they don't have a headquarters that has thousands of people that are living, for example, like Dow Chemical is in Midland, Michigan. Okay, the entire economy of Midland and for miles around depends on Dow Chemical. When you're talking about Facebook and Airbnb and Uber and companies like this, it just isn't the same. The footprint of the headquarters just is not the same. Yep. And as a result, connecting corporate philanthropy or corporate investment, I should say, to individual physical communities, that's actually it is more challenging even as we are making progress in many CEOs understanding the importance of investing in community health.
Yeah, no, the reason I bring it up is that as you well know, being in South Florida, that as the populations become much more diverse, this issue of building a culture of health is becoming more critical because it's those growing diverse populations that are most susceptible to chronic disease states, which impacts their performance at work, impacts their communities, their own communities, and impacts the ability for organizations to really flourish if if these communities are dealing more, have more distractions because of these inherent healthcare issues that we have. And that's one of the reasons I want to bring it up and get your perspective on that.
Good.
Scott, anything else?
I just wanted to connect two observations I had from, I love, John, you were talking about the hybrid work and sort of the challenges and opportunities coming forth now as we sort of grow more accustomed to this hybrid work model and as everyone adjusts to it, but also you speak about the entrepreneur as a rooted entrepreneur, that successful entrepreneurs, whether it's now or maybe even a decade or so ago, in order to be a successful solo pilot entrepreneur, you have to be rooted in your humanity and in your community. What I'm seeing is at the meta level here is you're coming back to connectivity. And I promise this is not going to be as long as it's going to sound, but if we go back to the emergence of humankind 7 million years ago, 6 billion years ago, when the first apes kind of started to semi-walk upright, freeing up our hands, we were very connected then because we had to be connected in small groups as hunter-gatherers. And if we think about our trajectory to 2021, I think what you're saying, we need to listen more. And I'm going to need to read more of your work and maybe talk to you again, because this connectivity issue is I think, at the heart of a lot of what we're grappling with across disciplines, across silos. And what I'm saying here is that we've spent 7 million years as highly connected hunter-gatherer people whose economy, whose mode of production was singular and small, where we all knew each other. And that's pretty easy to take care of and to manage compared to what we do now. Now, think about this, 7 million years, and all of a sudden it takes about 3 or 4 to get our first stone tools. And then it takes another 3-ish to get us to agriculture, right? And agriculture just 12,000 years ago, out of the 7 million year trajectory, changed everything. We have agriculture, next thing you know, cities emerge, right? Money, this idea of money and credit emerges. All of these things emerge that today to us seem so natural. So what I would like to just draw from your observations today and maybe challenge all of us to think about is this idea that connectivity, our humanity and our connectivity with humanity, regardless of whether we're going to be a monk or an entrepreneur, depends on really maybe putting this a little bit further up on the shelf in terms of closer to eye level, because I think that's what we're grappling with. When you have an entrepreneur that's trying to do what they want to do as an individual, they reckon with their limits because they're hunter-gatherers. They've only had 12,000 years to get used to this, let's be more competitive with each other. And so with that, I have one mini lesson, and I want to bring our lawyers into this conversation, not for sort of legal purposes, but because I think the NAACP and the court cases, the Road to Brown, which desegregated schools in the United States, at least de jure, they have something to teach us here. If we look at how the lawyers took cases from graduate schools all the way up to, or I should say, I'm going to say all the way up to kindergarten, right? Bit by bit, one case after another. What they did in so many different ways and in so many different cases and in so many different states and in so many different contexts, they said a school and an education is not just access to the class. That, when we go to Texas, they got in trouble and they had to overturn their segregated system specifically because lack of alumni network, lack of library research, lack of everything that you're talking about, that Miami as a residential and physical place of scholars and community, that's what makes it work. So I think I just need to thank you for bringing me 2 ideas today that I can't wait to go back on. One, I'm going to go to your readings to think a little bit more about this connectivity thing that I just see bouncing all around the upside of your head there. And then the other side is going back to the legal cases that were successful in bringing us desegregation in American schools, because I think deep within their structural arguments, we're going to find why Google University isn't going to work, but Google can make a lot of cool things to make universities work. With that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Glenn, or to you, John.
No, turn it back to John.
John, I totally agree with the last point. And, universities have to do a lot more to work closely in partnership with corporations. Actually, on the science discovery side, universities in the United States do a better job of that than almost any other higher education system in the world. Maybe not Israel, but we have to be more open, ecumenical, and understand that partnerships with folks outside of academia, that's going to be essential to competitive success and survival, indeed, going forward.
Well,
I'll leave it there.
Yeah. And excuse me, John, this is why, we've been talking about in leadership in the age of personalization, that this convergence is coming, that you cannot transform on your own, whether you're higher ed, corporate, or healthcare. All these three sectors are solving for the same things, just packaged differently. They're all solving for the individual. And,
yes.
That as a brand strategist, and again, I say this respectfully, I love to get your counter view on this as we close, but we've always said that we're student-centered, that we're consumer-centered, that we're patient-centered, that we're employee-centered. And that's not true. We've had many limits that have not allowed us to bring these key stakeholders into the fold so that they can help us co-design the future together. And we learned that during the pandemic. So didn't know if you had any final thoughts.
I think genetics is going to be the real name of the game in the rest of this century. And I'm not sure where that's going to take us, but the level and speed of discovery in terms of how genetics can be applied to make things better for everybody, that's I think, a major opportunity. And I look forward to seeing what the science combined with the business is able to achieve, and hopefully the regulators won't be too far behind the curve.
Yep.
And we'll be able to collectively ensure that all of what's done is for the good rather than for evil.
That's a great point. Go ahead, Scott. Quickly, we're out of time.
It's true, but one easy, quick thing about genetics, I want to point out that the people that were early on in the genetics game and figuring out that were these things that we could call maybe genes, or what we were calling them before, factors and other things before, they worked that science out by focusing on the individual, on the individual. So they're looking at the genome of the individual. And we didn't accomplish anything when that was our framework. As soon as science evolved and kept testing and correcting and moved from the individual genome to population genetics, everything changed.
Much better.
So let's remember, Glenn, when you solve for the individual, you're going to solve for the individual. But as soon as you do, your heart is going to be broken because you've just lost the most important thing an individual can ever have. And that is its connection and its belonging to humanity.
Great way to end. John, any final points?
That's fine. I can't beat that. Scott, you did a good job. Thanks.
Very good. Well, John, listen, we certainly appreciate your time. We enjoyed the conversation with you, and time got the best of us. But look, as we always close, in the age of personalization, you will see things that others don't, do what others won't, and keep pushing when prudence says quit. John, great to have you. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Personalization Outbreak. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. If you enjoyed the content, visit ageofpersonalization.com to check out our free streaming video series and learn how to get involved in the movement. I'm Glenn Yopes. I wish you a good day, and remember, without strategy, change is merely substitution, not evolution.